Okay, hello everyone. Today I have Arunava Sinha. He is a very, very well-known translator and writer, and he has translated over 100 books, mostly Bengali and also a few in Hindi, from Hindi and Bengali to English. And it's been a pleasure to read your books, Arunava, and I'm so glad that we are doing this today. Um, so tell me how did this journey begin for you? Like how did you really get into writing? Were you always very good with languages? Because I guess to become a translator, you really need to be good at both the languages that you work with, right? So how did this begin for you?
Yeah, thank you for having me, first of all. Um, yeah, so I don't know exactly, I can't put an exact date and time when I became a translator. I think you are a translator. I think everybody is a translator if they're a reader. Just that some of them fulfill that potential and go on to formally translate, but the others will pass on what they've read. They will tell stories to others. They will share their experiences. They will often retell the whole story in excitement. And all of these are very legitimate and widespread forms of translation, right? So, translation, as we understand it, is more a publishing category where a book become is reproduced in another language for publication to be formally read by readers. But as an activity, it goes on all the time. And
Yeah,
as you know, Priyanka, if you live in India, you're also translating in daily life all the time because
absolutely.
you're seldom living in just one language. So
Absolutely.
you're
Sometimes
moving
I
back
also
and forth.
forget that, the language has become such a big concussion in my head. And I read this in one of your book where you write the acknowledgement and the introduction section in the greatest Indian stories ever told. You write that India is a country where people are often born with a different language, they work in a different language, and when they start travel or when they live abroad, they also kind of embrace that third language to an extent that you pretty much are translating on a daily basis. And now I live in Germany, so German has now an added language to my life.
Yeah,
So absolutely, like it becomes part of our life, no, the translating thing.
yeah.
So the main essence of your work that I have, whatever I have felt, is that you're almost like the curator of Bengali literature for the world, right? Because regional languages such as Bengali, which is so rich in its literature, we have some of the biggest writers who happen to come from Bengal and have written such marvelous works. And we are going to talk about one such book later. But you're almost like curating that language for the world, right? Because not even the ones who are born Bengali, a lot of them, especially in this generation, are not able to read that original text in Bengali. But how do you make sure that essence of that story or of that novel of that work that sometimes is also, let's say, 50 years old or 70 years old? How do you make sure that essence is preserved? Or how I read somewhere you said that probably it's not the essence that you are looking for, but you're more looking at it as someone who is preserving that literature. What do you think your role is in this sense?
Well, my role is to translate. Everything else is a byproduct. I mean, I don't start out thinking that I'm going to be curating a collection of Bangla Sahitya or make books available to those who have roots with Bangla, connections with Bangla, but don't read in Bangla. Those are not my thoughts to begin with.
Okay.
It's really just translating. And translating, as I said, is a form of reading and then rereading aloud,
Okay.
except that you're using a different language when you're rereading, right? So that's all there is to it. It is a purely, to me, an artistic endeavor.
Hmm.
And everything that follows, such as publication, readership, etc., comes later. It is not, those elements are not built into the act of translation. They're sort of, they what come naturally thereafter. But of course, all translators end up being curators of sort of literatures from their language, because how else do you discover literature in a language that you don't know of, right? You'll only read it in translation. And in cases out of 10, it is the translator who has brought the book to the publisher's attention. Of course, publishers also commission on their own. But in India, it's mostly translators from all the languages who go to the publisher and say, I'd like to translate this book. Would you be interested in publishing it?
I would
And
imagine when you started translating, there was nothing like a Google Translate or a Chat GPT or a Claude. How do you, but I know a lot of times the output that comes out of these systems are also not artistic, like you mentioned, no? So you don't look yourself as someone who is just converting A into B, but is also absorbing it or enhancing it, or I don't know, trying to preserve the essence. So how did things change in the last 10 years, 15 years?
before I get to that, I'll just answer the rest of your question, the one that you asked earlier. As far as the essence is concerned,
Mhm.
I'm against the idea of a work of art having a singular essence. That is kind of essentializing it to just one thing, which it is not. A great work of art is great precisely because it is many things, number one, and it is many things to many people. It is not even the same thing to each reader. And that is where its greatness lies. That is also the reason that it travels across not just geography, but also time. That is the reason that a book written 100 years ago or 50 years ago is still read with the same kind of interest or even greater interest and affection today than compared to when it was originally published. So, this is because of all the things that a book does, right? And if you think of yourself as a reader, you'll realize straight away that you didn't love a book because it did just one thing to you. There might be one predominant thing, which might be the story, which might be the characters, which might be the language, but that alone would not have sufficed. So for a translator, the objective is really to fulfill the potential of the text in another language. So if the text can mean 100 things to 100 people in, say, Bangla, then my translation should also mean 100 things to 100 people in English. And that therefore takes away from me the choice of picking on just one or two things and saying, this is what matters about this book, and therefore I'm going to preserve this, right? So
Understood.
you don't jump to conclusions when you're translating. You actually let the questions hang so that the readers can answer them and arrive at their own journey. And a great text, and this brings me to your last
So it
question.
must be very
A great
tempting, no, to like answer all the time because you understood everything, and
Yeah,
it must be very
it
tempting.
is, but yeah, but the whole idea is not to do that, right?
Yes,
Because if the whole point is you cannot take away from the reader their right to interpret and
yes,
understand, right? I can't do it for them just because I've been able to do it. I mean,
and
that's
enjoy
that's
the
your classic,
original. Uh,
yeah, that's like translators explaining, right? I know this text so well that I'm going to explain it all to you through my translator. Yeah,
that's an
that's
interesting
not a good
word.
idea. Yeah. So and the point is that a great text does not reside on the surface meaning of the words or the phrases or the sentences. In fact, very often, what it means is not at all the dictionary meaning of the
Yeah,
words, right? A great text actually takes you somewhere behind it. As you read it, you travel somewhere. And each of us goes on that travel in our own particular way, depending on who we are, where we are, when we are, and so on, right? So we are trying to arrive somewhere, but the journey is not the same for all of us. So that is exactly what an artificial intelligence, so-called artificial intelligence agent, which is actually just large language modules, and
yes,
it works on a basis of probability, which is
correct.
that given these samples, if this is the word that appears first, which word is most likely to appear next, given what there is in the text being translated. But AI doesn't read. AI cannot read. AI cannot therefore feel. AI cannot marvel at anything. AI cannot be put off. AI has no emotions with which to respond to the text, no feelings, no experience to fall back on, no memories to create, no relationships to evoke or
Yes,
invoke,
yes.
right? All the things that we do when we are reading a book are things that AI is incapable of doing. Therefore, AI will do a very good job of translating a technical manual,
Mm,
where communication is the key.
Hmm.
it'll do a great job, and let it. But
Yeah.
when it comes to literature that will last through the ages, it is certainly not going to be a surface reproduction of words. Now, it's possible. When the theory, when people use neural networks initially to create artificial intelligence, what they said was, and this is way back in the 1990s, it started, 80s even. What they said was, we don't know how the brain works, but if we can mimic the complexity of the brain, maybe it will do the things that the brain does. We don't know how it will do it, but sheer complexity will enable it. So they simulated the brain, not physically, but on a computer. And they hope that that would lead to things happening. So neural networks have been around for 40 years and they had not delivered the kind of breakthroughs that today's AI claims to deliver. So you realize that just reproducing the surface in all its complexity does not lead to the richness that lies underneath it. In some way, you have to appreciate that richness and you have to validate it very importantly. So when I've translated, I read my own translation and I have to ask myself, is this text doing the same things to me in this language that it did to me in the language in which it first came to life, right? And again, AI doesn't do any such thing. And in order to do those things, let's say you've got a very beautiful text in Bangla, right? Something by Rabindranath or Buddhadev Bose or anybody for that matter. All good text is beautiful text in its own way. Vibhuti Bhushan, Abani Boshu, Navanita Debsen, Nashapurna Devi. And you want your translated text to retain or recreate that beauty. But to create beauty, you need some tools, right? You need building blocks.
Hmm.
Now you're translating into a different language. So you have to use the building blocks of that language. What's beautiful in Bangla rendered literally into English will not necessarily be beautiful, right? So you have to look for something that is genuinely beautiful in English. And so your fidelity lies to the beauty. And as
Yes.
we know, thanks to Keats, truth is beauty and beauty truth. So your fidelity to truth is through the beauty, and for that beauty you have to use the new language, right? And again, these are things that is an artistic effort. It's not a mechanical effort. It's not a language processing or data processing effort.
Absolutely.
So that is why, while AI will get closer to the final thing, I doubt very much that it will actually get there, at least not using the current algorithms. Maybe if many translators are brought in to train AI,
Hmm.
maybe it might happen. Is that worth anyone's while? No, because it's not as though you're going to save a lot of money by replacing human translators with AI translators, because you translators hardly get paid anyway. So I suspect that it will remain in the domain of individual activity. Big publishers who want to publish a lot of books may use AI and may be happy with 70 to 80% or 60% fidelity in translation. And I use the word fidelity in every sense, in the sense in which two people are faithful to each other. I use
Yeah.
it in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Which is very much a matter of mind, body, heart, everything, right? So, but many publishers may be satisfied with less than that and may want scale. They may want to produce 100 books in 3 months. So, sure, they might use AI for that. But the best translations will still come from humans.
Absolutely. I agree with you, but I think there would be nobody else but you who could explain this in the right way, in such a descriptive, convincing way. I also feel that translation is an act of humility, like you're really enamored. You really have to be enamored by that work to again be able to absorb it and then express it in a different language. But it is also an act of authorship where you are pretty much writing that story on that author's behalf. But tell me, when you begin translating a book, what do you listen for first? Do you look at the rhythm, the prose, the voice, the emotions, or if it is a big author like, let's say, Rabindranath or Shankar, as your latest book that I have stumbled upon is. So, does that play a more important role in you choosing a translated work, or is it really the prose or the essence of that book?
Yeah. So when you read a great book, again, as I said, you don't usually just narrow it down to one thing,
Correct.
right? There are many things about it that appeal to you. Some of them may be on the surface, such as the rhythm, the sounds, the music, the particular vocabulary, um, the sentence construction, and so on. But much of it is also the way it is drawing you into this new world and making you inhabit it. And really, for me at least, the only way to get there is to validate, is not to mechanically break down a text into various components, but I treat it as an organic whole. I translate organically, and then I work backwards to see if, as I said, does it feel like the same text to me? Not in the choice of words or the sounds necessarily, but does it feel like the same text? Do I feel like I'm reading the same book? And that's the point you made about humility. Here's the paradox of translation, which is that a translator must keep themselves as writers with their own ideas
Mhm.
away from the text,
Mhm.
or their particular style of writing or their particular school of writing must not intrude, right? But at the same time, as you said, every single word is the translator's choice, or that translator's choice. Another translator would have chosen a different set of words, a different syntax, and so on. So you are curiously invisible in your visibility, right? You want to persuade the reader that this book, every word in it, was actually written by Rabindranath or Shankar or Buddhadev
Yeah.
Boshu or whoever, while knowing full well that not even one of those words was written by them. So, the translator Daniel Hahn says a translation is the same book with completely different words. But
Yeah.
other than the fact that the words are completely different, it is the
It
same
is the
book.
same thing.
And so, yeah, so you are trying to recreate the same book. That's very important. It will be different on the surface, but in its heart, it cannot be different, right? If if you read Dostoevsky to feel um, anguish and dread and
You feel it
existentialist
in any language.
despair, then you cannot turn him into a romantic writer in another
Correct.
language, even if there are appearances of romantic action and storylines on the surface, right? So that's what you aim for, that completeness with all the branches going in all directions. Sometimes, having said that, sometimes one element will sometimes be more prominent than others. Like, for example, if you're reading, um, I think most important for me is not so much uh, what that one element is, but how that one element is unique. How is the Bangla that Ashapurna Devi or Navonita Devsen or Bani Boshu writing that is unique in the Bangla language?
Correct.
And therefore, how do I recreate that uniqueness in the English language or in any other language for any other translator, right? The relationship between the text and the language is what needs to be preserved in the translation. Otherwise, you'll flatten it or you'll end up adopting a completely different register, right? And translation is really a challenge of language. It is not a challenge of literature. In fact, it's best not to know too much about literature when you're translating, because then you're trying to accommodate many things that do not originate in the text, but are in your head from your perception of what the world of literature. Like, I know Bani Boshu's work. Therefore, and I know it includes the following 10 things. Therefore, I will ensure that this text also has the following 10 things. But that, to my mind, would be a failure from the beginning, because you should only be concerned with that text and what that text is doing with its language, right? Gregory Rabassa, who's the translator of Gabriel Garcia Marquez, and who probably made translation really sexy with 100 Years of Solitude, because
Mhm.
that's a book
Books were written in
which
Spanish originally, right?
written in Spanish and translated in the late 1960s or early 70s. And when Garcia Marquez won the Nobel Prize in 82, that was when the English translation sort of exploded onto readers.
Okay.
And Gregory Rabassa said, "I am led by the text. Nothing else matters." Right? I will spend hours wondering why the writer used this word and not that word.
Okay.
Sure, but that's a language problem.
Challenge. Hmm.
Yeah, and therefore I will solve it in the same way, that this is why I think the writer used this word, and therefore, so famously, Rabasa talks about the fact that he used the word, in the very famous first sentence of 100 years. Colonel Aureliano, many years later, as he was facing the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendio was to remember the day his father took him to discover ice. And he talks about that word discover. And in an essay he wrote on translating the book, he he explains why he used discover and not see or look at, which would have been a literal rendition of the word used by Garcia Marquez. But to him, he read in it a discovery because Aureliano Buende had never seen ice before. So when you see something that you know, and when you see something that you've never seen before, they're two entirely different
Yes.
experiences, right? And you need your language to convey that. So that's what I'm talking about, right? Now, this is Rabasa thinking of Aureliano Buendia the way Garcia Marquez has written it.
Would have thought
This
even
is
before probably he was born, or maybe
Yeah,
just
but this is not about Rabasa saying what would I do as a writer.
yeah, exactly. But tell me one thing, like you have been doing this for such a long time, and rightly so, and there must be so many other translators around the world who would have also just dedicated themselves to a certain language and taken
Yeah.
that almost as their life's purpose to be the bridge, for instance. Haven't you ever had the dream to create your own original work? And how did that go? Because it almost feels like a sacrifice to your own creative endeavor, no? Like, I'm just thinking, what would Arunava write if he were to write his own book and not a translated book? Have you ever thought about it?
No, I've never had the urge. And because as a translator, you read so many fantastic books so closely, because the translator reads a text more closely than any reader, possibly even the writer themselves, right? Because the writer is working out of a creative space. Sometimes the words are just flowing out of them.
But you're reading the
Uh,
legends. It's unfair to like compare yourself to
no,
them,
no,
no?
no. Let me
Is
finish.
it
Let me
is it
finish.
something like
Let me finish. So when you read so much of this and you read such wonderful literature, the last thing you want to do is add to the noise. And there
why?
is, what is the point of writing a less than outstanding book just to say I'm a writer? If I had it in me to write a book, the urge that I could not subdue, that I could not quell, I would have done it. For sure, I would have done it. But I don't have it. So it is like a mechanical question. Should we have mutton or lamb for dinner tonight? So that's not. There's nothing screaming inside you saying you want crab, eat crab. No, so you're going with mutton or lamb. So it's something like that. If there were that urge, I would have done it. If you look around the world, you'll find not all, but the majority of translators have not written
To it? Yeah,
uh,
have stuck to translations. True.
abstract translation. Also, I love it, and we all love it. We all love translating. And the greatest thing about translation is that you can never have writer's block because
True.
the text is already
You can
there.
just pick up
You
another
don't
book.
Exactly. If you're struggling with one text, you can go on to another one, but you never have to worry about what to write. Where does the story go from here? What should I put on the next para, in the next sentence? What should the next word be? You never have to worry about these things. That is also obviously why translators have so many more books against their name than, let's say, non-translator writers do. And I dare say translators are writers. I mean, they're producing books.
That's true, but I don't know. I mean, you almost broke my heart. You almost discouraged me to write a book now, because
No,
I
no, I'm
think
not discouraging you.
I think
If
so
if you
many so
What's
many
your urge? if you have that tremendous urge to write a book that you are convinced will be as good as anything in the world, then you must
No,
write it.
I'm wondering, someone who has translated 100 books, how can he not have an urge to write an original book or his own story?
No, it goes, no, not at all. It goes down with every book I translate. I'm always just on the lookout for even greater works that I can translate.
So it's probably because you are reading the legends, you are reading the Nobel laureates, you're reading the people whose writing is almost like, let's say, textbook of literature. Because you're reading that quality of work, you feel that, okay, what will my little thing stand in front of these stalwarts? Or I don't know. I just wanted to understand what goes in your head, and this has to come from various places. No, it has to come from various places that probably I will never have or I don't have the urge to tell a story. I don't have anything new to say that has not already been said. I think Shakespeare said that there are only seven stories that exist in this world. So if we went by it, we wouldn't be having 20. I think last I checked, we were producing 30,000 books a year, like fiction, works of commercial fiction. We wouldn't have
Yeah.
that kind of numbers coming out now.
No, so it's not about the story. Shakespeare was right. Every story is a variation of something that exists already. It's never about the story, right? I just read a novel called Transmission by Ben Lerner. If you ask me what the story is, I can tell it to you in like two sentences,
Mhm.
right? A man, the guy who's narrating the book in throughout, is going to interview a former professor of his, and he drops his phone into the sink and cannot record the conversation. But he cannot break it to the professor, so the professor continues to talk, and there is no recorded version of the interview. That's part one. There's a brief interlude in part two where the professor has died, and the narrator is now at a conference commemorating the professor, and he confesses that he never recorded that last interview which was published. And so there's a reaction to that. And the third part is almost a monologue from this dead professor's son, right? Now that's it. That's it. Now, if you ask me, where's the story? There is none, right? And yet it is one of the finest books I've read in recent times. It is the writing, it is the way the words flow, it is the way, and because people are speaking, you get this fantastic vision of these individuals only through the words that they're speaking, because through that their memory, their lives, everything comes out, right? Now, to have the urge to write something like that is the kind of urge I'm talking about, right? It must be something welling up in you. It's not about a storyline or a plot. In fact, if you have a story in your head, most likely you are writing either genre fiction or commercial fiction,
Yes.
right? Because you're being led by the plot. You
Yes.
know, the filmmaker Dibakar Banerjee once told me something which I consider fantastic. He said, in any story, the things that happen to the characters should be said that they can only happen to those characters.
How is it
So the
possible?
story must begin with the characters. And likewise, given the characters that you have, the things that are happening to them in your book or film must be the only things that can happen to them. So it's a unique combination of people and events, right? Which comes organically out of a third space. It doesn't originate in a storyline, it doesn't originate in a character sketch. It originates in this strange creative space where people and things that are happening to them just spring up in your head. Now, everybody can do that. What most of us fail at is in finding the words for it. Right? How many times have we tried to write something and said, like Eliot did in his poetry, that is not what I meant. That is not what I meant at all. Right? There's such a gap
The
between what we think
eternal
and what we write.
struggle.
And which is why, Priyanka, writing is the first form of translation, because you are translating something that's in your head into words. The idea of translation originated as um, the effort to put down the words of God, which were unspoken in written form, right? Both Islam and Christianity talks about this. In the beginning was the word. And the original effort was to say, what is God saying or thinking? But we cannot hear God. So you use your perception or your imagination to think it up and put it down in words. Now that is where translation began. And also from that very moment, you realize then that translation effectively is the art form of failure. Because if you don't know clearly what it is you're translating, how are you going to have a precise, accurate version of it, right? So translation is very much an act of the imagination, right? It is an act of speculation. This is what I think it says.
Do you think people
Therefore, I'm going
understand
to.
all this about translation? Do they know that it is such a creative task? And do you think people understand this?
It doesn't matter. As long as they enjoy the translated book, that's all that
So
matters.
much goes behind, so much thought goes behind making one language stand out into another for people. There's so much thought that goes
Thought
into
does, but somehow eventually translators also internalize these things,
internalize these
So they're
things.
not thinking about it consciously all the
Correct,
time.
correct.
And
It's
this is
become
true
part
of
of the
any
job.
art form. I mean, you don't have to know how a film is made to love a film.
Correct,
You
correct.
don't have to know how a song is recorded to love a song. But
Correct.
translators are like actors. I mean, there's always this world is full of metaphors, the world of translation. So translators are like actors. The script exists, but only the actor will bring it to life, right? And each actor will perform it their own way. So
Absolutely.
that's what translation is.
Absolutely. I think what I was going to talk to you next, I could go on and on for hours because you have translated one of the iconic authors from Bengal, Shankar, that's his pen name, Mani Shankar Mukherjee. He was born in 1933, and your latest book on Kindle that I saw, um, Dear Reader, a writer's memoir, which is originally in Bengali called the Eka Akashi. I just loved first few chapters of that book, and I'm so hooked into it because it's so much about the ordinary people, ordinary people navigating institutions, ambition, class, so much about the city of Kolkata. Tell me how did you think about writing this, and do you think this generation or people who have never read Shankar, or honestly even I didn't know about Shankar, like honest confession, I'm a born Bengali, but my parents would really judge me for this, but I didn't know, and then I went into a rabbit hole of researching his work. Then I stumbled upon Chorungi Lane and the work that he has done that has been made into films by Satyajit Ray, and I was like, oh my God, why didn't I know about this author? So tell me, what was your experience writing this memoir? Like, it's a memoir that you have translated, right?
It's a memoir. It's not a memoir from start to finish, as in a single book.
Hmm.
The volume was created by compiling a number of various autobiographical essays that he wrote at various points of time.
Okay.
Yeah, and they were published when he turned 81, therefore Aka Aka Akashi. Shankar, because my first published translation was of his novel Chorungi.
Okay.
And so that was how the journey began for me. So I've always, I owe him. So and when I read these essays brought out, compiled into a single book, I really felt that it would be wonderful to tell these stories, because Shankar, of all the writers I've translated, Shankar was a storyteller first and a story creator afterwards.
After. Okay.
Yeah, for him, it wasn't so much about thinking up stories from scratch as about telling stories that he
It
had
already
heard, that he had
exists.
known, that people had told him. So whether it was Chorongi or before that Koto Ojanare or Shima Bodho or John Oronno and all the others, all of them came out of real life. But his
Absolutely.
unique skill was in ওই বাঁধুনি যেটা বাংলায় বলে, his unique skill was in weaving them into a story in a manner that could both keep you enthralled and move you and touch you. See, Shankar did not write the kind of prose that many quote unquote literary writers in
Yes.
Bangla and other languages did. He wrote a very lucid, flowing prose. But in that lucid, flowing prose, there was this energy and heart,
Yes.
which
Endearing quality, no?
yes, which really appealed to me.
Absolutely. I don't know if it would be fair to compare him to someone like R.K. Lakshman, which we have grown up, the Malgudi days and things like that. I think that was my only reference of writing about
Yeah. You
smaller
know
cities.
who he reminds me of? He reminds me of the Egyptian writer Mahfuz, Naguib Mahfuz. Yeah,
Haven't
if you
got that
try him,
far.
especially the Kaido trilogy, he was a Nobel laureate.
Okay.
Uh, yeah.
Amazing. I'm really looking forward to reading your books. Like I said, this was the book that I discovered first. And this was 10 years ago when I moved to Berlin, to a new country where I had to learn a new language. And it was very difficult for me to, stay connected to Bengali literature. I read Bengali, but not so good that I can sustain it for hours to finish novels. But thanks to you and your translation work, that I now have access to so many books. So personally, I always wanted to meet you and talk to you. So thank you so much for taking out the time today. And
Thank you
I
for
wish you
having
all
me
the
on your
best.
show.
And I'll keep in touch. I will keep reading your books and
Please
I'll
do.
send you my observations. And I still
Yes,
haven't given
please.
up on the wish that you will write something original once. I don't
We'll see.
know. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Have a good day.